Although I think actually mine will record to the cloud or something. Anyway, all right. So thanks everybody for being here. This is only our second. I know we're kind of behind the times. Henri and everybody have been doing a lot of video meetups and that sort of thing, and we have not for Jamstack NYC. So this is our second video meetup, and hopefully at some point we'll get back to in-person meetups and that sort of thing. So, but I think that this format lends itself to kind of a nice informal discussion, and that's what I hope we're going to do tonight. Particularly since, you know, I've known these guys. So my background, you know, being involved with Jamstack stuff since 2012, 2013. And I've always, you know, for the new dynamic and just for my own work, have been very interested in the ecosystem and how, you know, how it's kind of grown up around me. When, you know, when we started, there were no editors to speak of. You know, there weren't very many tools. The major static site generator was Jekyll. And so I've watched this all grown up around me, and through that and through my involvement with the new dynamic, you know, I've gotten to know Frank and Mark and Andrew, you know, quite a bit, and kind of watch their companies grow and that sort of thing. So this is kind of exciting for me, to see you all chat and to see about, you know, particularly talking about your paths and what's the best way, you know, to go, or maybe not the best way, the best for any given company, you know, right? And what that means for the rest of us. And I have some opinions about what that means for the rest of us, being a big consumer of Jamstack tools as well. So I'll let you guys give a little bit of, you know, your own bios, but I just wanted to, you know, preface the conversation with that these are, you know, I think we're at the beginning of the Jamstack era and web development. And so, you know, these are people to pay attention to for what's happening in the future. Did you want to add anything, Gerald?
I'm Gerald, obviously, you just said my name. And for all of you new people, feel free to chime in. The chat is available. People, we'd love to see you talking, asking questions, and you know, sharing your opinions and experiences. So I started talking to Bud, I believe this almost 3.5 years ago. About the time I met Bud. And then over the last 3 years, you know, gotten to meet Andrew and Mark and Frank at the different events that we've been doing. And I work at Netlify, where we provide tooling and infrastructure for building Jamstack sites. And I also do build Jamstack sites and provide advice to people who build them and help, you know, solve problems with helping people migrate to Jamstack. So I find this really exciting. I also consider myself an indie developer and an indie hacker at heart. So this is going to be a very interesting chat. So I guess we'll let everyone introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Frank.
Yeah, hi. I'm Frank. My real name is Francois Lanthier Nadeau, but I find it more global to go with Frank. I'm the CEO at Snipcart. Snipcart is an e-commerce solution for developers. Most of the stuff lives in the front end, so it's very Jamstack friendly. And we've been pushing this paradigm and this community from the get-go.
Andrew?
All right, just had to unmute. Hi, I'm Andrew Sprouse, co-founder and CTO of Takeshape. I'm here with Mark. Mark and I met in college and have worked with each other through many years, through 3+ companies, and now we started Takeshape together and started it as a, you know, basically Jamstack-centric CMS with a focus on static site generators. And then we've been adding more functionality and making it more of an API integration platform recently.
I'm Mark Catalano, the other founder of Takeshape and CEO. And Andrew gave us a great introduction there. I would say that we're really interested. We've been building things on the Jamstack since kind of early days. My background is that I ran an agency in Brooklyn for a long time, and a lot of the ideas that we have around Takeshape actually came out of that experience running an agency. And as Andrew said, we're building a platform for the Jamstack and really focus on solving the problem of how you construct your applications when you have lots of decoupled APIs. And so to that end, we're building what we call an API mesh.
Thank you. All right, Frank, I think you have something prepared for us.
Yeah, I can't. Do I have the like?
You should be able to share your screen.
Yeah, I am. Okay, awesome. So we'll go with that desktop too. You folks can see that?
Yep.
Okay, nice. Well, I'll just kind of introduce the subject from my point of view, if you will. And I think that'll be like a good jumping board towards more organic discussion or whatever. So I've been meaning to talk about the Bootstrap Jamstack for a while now, and I'm happy to do it. I kind of already introduced myself. So I'll skip this. Yeah, that was when we could drink coffee in Paris and travel the world, that kind of stuff. I missed that. So yeah, I was doing positioning work with our designer at Snipcart, and we kind of quickly realized that many of the e-commerce players were heavily funded in the space, the ones that are still relatively relevant for the Jamstack space. So as most of you listening know, you basically have two main paths when you decide to build something, build a business. It's either bootstrapped path, where you focus on lifestyle and profitability, for instance, independence, and a VC-funded path. Now, there are some hybrids now, but this is still one of the big ones, right? Where you focus on scale and hyper growth and exits and valuation. So this is not a X versus Y kind of talk. It's just exploring options. So yeah, back to that slide here. It kind of made me want to dig just a little bit deeper in the space, so we could see how it was distributed, how funding was distributed across the Jamstack space in different companies and categories, right? So I started with e-commerce solutions because it kind of came easily for me, and I kind of realized very quickly that Snipcart was like one of the only ones that capped, that transcended that 5 years cap, which is, it's a big milestone. It's like if you don't do the 5 years more, like I think it's 99% die before that, the startups, not the founders, hopefully. So yeah, I felt like it was interesting to share that contrast here. But what was interesting is also to go and see another big part of the ecosystem of the Jamstack space, headless CMSs, and there the ratio of bootstrap versus funded is much more spread out, right? It's much more even. So you see a lot of old, quote unquote, products that have zero funding. So I thought that was interesting to notice. And then this is just, by the way, a rough start of maybe a website or a repo. I'm not sure what I'll do with this. And then there are some agencies, and right, I just started. And so if you have any Jamstack-centric agencies, we can put them there, and other kind of tools in the business, we could put them there. So yeah, I think there are some problems with both approaches, but I think that's something we see a lot in this beautiful illustration, is that sometimes it's not necessarily a evil intent that drives a project to failure when it is funded by millions in VC. I think it's just that there's a lot of things going on, quick and fast, and a lot of money, and a lot of growth, and a lot of new people, and It's very, very dynamic, and this can maybe lead to some unfulfilled potential for some businesses. So what I want to say is that success on both these paths is very, very different, right? On the Bootstrap path, you'll focus on profitability, like I mentioned. On the VC path, you'll be more on the growth side of things without necessarily taking into account profits, or at least not for a long, long while. So my point is just to say that like these are two different success metrics. So it kind of, the question becomes, what resonates the most with you as an entrepreneur or as a developer who wants to start a product. Another word, just the last word on VC that I think is very fair to claim is that when you have an enterprise venture that needs a very wide adoption in a market, something that's very large and horizontal, and think infrastructure, that kind of stuff, I think like VC makes a lot of sense to inject that much capital to be able to go get that spread in a market. Netlify, for instance, after speaking with Matt and Chris, they just bluntly told me, with the ambition of our project, we could not have competed without VC money. So that's one thing. So just before I kind of close all of that, I want to share why I want to bring Bootstrap and Jamstack together as more of a community or a single unit. I think we see a lot of indie communities popping up. So you have startups for the rest of us, indie hackers, and other ones that I forget. So these are very active. Oh, microconf and that kind of stuff. These are very active communities. And I think they provide some kind of a signal that many people do not want to go the VC route, which has a lot of pressures and more intense incentives, if you will. So I think it's kind of it's a roller coaster from, I personally did not raise money, but I've spoken with like dozens of founders who did, and dozens of investors and VCs who wanted to invest in Snipcart. And something I kept hearing was like, it's a roller coaster of emotions and intensity. And ultimately, there's kind of a two paths of ultimate success for founders: is get acquired or go public, basically. So I think, and then for the investors, it's exiting a round. So that's a weird notion to me. Like, you have people putting in a lot of money already thinking about leaving the company and leaving that world, right? Yeah. So the thing with Bootstrap and Jamstack is that it shares an ethos. And I'm going to run through that shared ethos real quick, and then I'm going to kind of open up the conversation. So let's see. First value that I feel is in both worlds is independence. In Jamstack, you see it in freedom from monoliths and giants and incumbents, and from tools with poor DX. In Bootstrap, you see it in freedom from corporate lifestyles, 9 to 5, boredom, physical location, that kind of stuff. Then you have another value, which is staying small. In Jamstack, you see it by no need for big architectures and hefty installs and huge downloads and maintenance. In Bootstrap, you'll see it with the fact that there's no need for tens of millions in revenue or hundreds of thousands of customers, and all of those fancy metrics. So another value that is shared that I like very much is kind of price consciousness. In Jamstack, you see it by the fact that there is no need to pay for a bunch of plugins and with extravagant hosting and a lot of maintenance, and you can rely on many free open source tools, and with the API economy, you can plug some of these things yourself. So that's cool. And the price consciousness in Bootstrap, it kind of comes with just the simple fact that you have to heat. So you spend wisely, and you take care of where your money goes. You check that out. And last but not least, there is a focus in both communities on like performance metrics, I'll call them, or just performance and stability. In Jamstack, which is still very dev oriented, you'll see things like user-centric metrics and front-end performance. So first contentful paint and that kind of the things you get from Lighthouse audits and whatnot. And in Bootstrap, you'll get some focus on important business metrics like profits, returns on investment, and then churn rate, lifetime value, that kind of stuff. But you'll also see it in like human-centric metrics. So the amount of sleep you're getting, the happiness, the financial comfort, the amount of free time you can generate for yourself with your business. So yeah, all of that being said, I think those two worlds have a lot in common, and I would like to see more bootstrappers, Jamstackers doing their thing. I've got a bunch of ideas and suggestions on how some existing businesses compete and how you can do so, tactics, but I'll try to weave them inside the conversation or share it in another way. So yeah, that's my big intro. I hope it gives people some food for thought. And I know the Takeshape folks have a different story than us, so I would very much like to hear what they can teach us about another point of view. Stop sharing this.
That was I think that was a really great introduction, Frank. I don't have any slides to, to go over and walk through, but I think it's a great launching off point for a conversation. One thing I'm taking notes as you're talking, and one thing that I would say is that with any business, whether it's bootstrapped or VC backed, when things are going well, your quality of life is always higher than when things are not going well. So like that's one thing that I wanted to react to immediately. I don't think there's a quality of life difference necessarily between a bootstrapped company and a VC backed company. At Takeshape, I'll talk about our story at Takeshape and kind of give you the how we got started and what we thought, like what our path was. So when we originally started Takeshape, we sort of incubated the idea, and the product, the kernel of the product was incubated inside of the agency that I owned in Brooklyn. And so Andrew was working with me at Ronick, which is the name of the agency, and we kind of came together to say like, hey, we've got a lot of these ideas about how people are building for the web now. We were an agency that was really set up to build on the Jamstack before there was the word Jamstack. Much like Bud, we were building with that approach, and so we were turning like Tumblr into a headless CMS before there were headless CMSs in 2012 or something like that. So we were doing all sorts of weird kind of stuff back then, and decided that we wanted to start experimenting with making headless CMSs, a headless CMS that was more real. And so we had incubated the idea originally inside the agency, and then eventually it outgrew what we were doing in the agency, and we wanted to dedicate our full time to it. And so to start, we thought, okay, we're going to bootstrap this thing into existence, and we're going to make this work potentially alongside the agency, and we'll see if we can actually build a product and an agency simultaneously. And we found that really complicated to operate two businesses simultaneously at once. And part of the reason for that was just because the agency business required so much of my personal attention that I wasn't really able to dedicate all of my time to thinking about how we were going to actually build a product and doing that. And so we basically took some of the ideas behind Takeshape, and we decided to turn it into a completely separate company. And we did that about 2 years ago at this point in 2018. And that was the point that we decided that we would still potentially bootstrap the company, but as its own entity, and kind of quickly realized that gaining traction as fast as we still needed to eat. And so gaining traction with the SaaS product while building it was complicated. And then on top of that, we had made a decision that we wanted to go after a venture scale outcome. And so one of the things that I think is important to know about the potential difference between a VC-backed company and a bootstrap company is that there's a decision point that you make in the business and also in the market to understand whether or not what you're building has the potential for a venture scale outcome or not. And if it does, and it's large enough that it takes enough time to build that you need capital to build that thing before you can reach a profitability so that you can continue to grow, then it makes sense to go and seek venture funding. And so that's what we actually started to do. So we spent some time thinking that we would bootstrap the company, and then decided that, hey, this opportunity is actually really large. You know, we have a really large vision for what we want to build here, and let's actually reconsider that bootstrapping plan and think about how this could be a venture scale outcome, and go after that. From there, we decided that so we actually went out in the world and tried our hand at fundraising, which is something we had never done before, and had no experience doing. And when you have no experience doing something and you're completely new to it, you probably are not going to succeed the first time. And we didn't succeed the first time that we went out to fundraise. We did so in a manner that was, I would say, very like naive, and didn't really know what we were doing, which is fine. You learn. And from that experience of going out and fundraising, doing an initial attempt at fundraising, which what we later learned was barely scratching the surface of what fundraising could be, we decided to go the route of working through an accelerator. And that's when we decided to participate in the TechStars accelerator program in Philadelphia, and went through that program, learned about what fundraising really meant, and then went out again and actually did another round of fundraising, which was eventually successful. And now we can call ourselves a VC-backed company. And that kind of brings us to today. So we closed our round of fundraising at the beginning of the pandemic in April, March, April. So Andrew and I were out in San Francisco fundraising in February as things were starting to happen in the world, and then came out of that experience kind of with the pandemic and with fundraising and building a VC-backed company all at once.
Yeah, that's a mess.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
I have a question for you, Andrew and Mark. Did you consider going the route of something like Tiny Seed, where you would take like a micro investment of something like $100,000, to tide you over? Yeah, so actually, when the first time we went out and did fundraising, one of the things that I did was I applied to Tiny Seed, and I applied to Indie VC, and we actually made it to kind of the final round in both of those conversations. So I sat and talked with Rob Walling and the founder of Indie VC, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment. But we had conversations with both of them about what we were doing and where we were at. And both Tiny Seed and Indie VC are really designed around being further along in your revenue. And they look for a certain amount of revenue for the companies that they invest in. Tiny Seed is a little different than Indie VC. And there's a couple questions about whether or not these things are designed to lead to eventual venture funding down the road, or whether they are really meant to be like the last funding source that you're going to need as they kind of advertise. But yeah, we had looked at that potential option. In the end, we ended up being a better fit for the venture funding versus the micro indie VC style funding.
Can I chip in? I think it's just a great story overall, and I guess it's a good timing for you to get some money just before a pandemic. Some people weren't as so lucky with timing. I got a buddy that sold his house and wanted to travel the world, and then COVID hit, so he didn't have a house and no travel plans. Yeah, so you mentioned that you kind of launched inside an agency, and that is one of the tactics I recommend to some bootstrappers who want to cushion the initial risks, right? So you do some client work, and then you try to spend a bit of your time and money on building a product. If it picks up, you can branch out, do another company, and blah, blah. We've done that at Snipcart, right? 7 years ago. And I know for a fact that the guys at DatoCMS, the folks in Italy, they've done the same thing, right? And it seems that for them, it's worked out. And my question to you would be, because I stuck on the word venture scale. Like when you said, okay, so you have to identify when you think your idea is like venture scale. And just walk us through what that decision process or evaluation of what venture scale is like.
Yeah, so I mean, venture scale basically means that your potential market size and your total addressable market, which in any business world is the potential market size for your product and your audience. And something that is venture scale is going to have a TAM in the billions. And so when you look at something like a WordPress, when you look at something like, I'm going to use the CMS market just because I'm maybe a little bit more familiar with that. You know, the TAM of something like the CMS market is in the tens of billions. So it's estimated anywhere from $10 to $20 billion. And when you look at the size of players in that space, they're valued at billions. They're valued in the billions. And so it's easy to make a case for how you can develop, you know, in the world of content management, you can develop the case for why there can be a $1 billion outcome for something like that product. A VC firm, so an investor, is going to look for that kind of outcome because of the economics of venture capital. And so the size of the outcome is really entirely related. The size of the needed outcome is entirely related to the economics of a venture capital investor and the way that their math works. And so there's an idea of venture math, which is just an explanation of like how you go from fund size to outcome, and that determines the kind of companies that VCs are going to invest in. And so as an entrepreneur, if you're interested in starting a business, you know, when you look at going down the route of venture versus bootstrapping, you know, there's a lot of things to consider. And one of those things is, you know, do you have a venture scale business? And then understanding what the economics are that drive like venture outcomes is important, because it will help you understand what the motivations of your investor actually are.
Would you all say, to me, venture math means enterprise customers and that sort of thing, and maybe that's naive, but you know, when I see a company that I like go and get venture funding, I think that it's kind of the end of my ability to use that service, you know, well, because the pricing and
you know, a great counterexample of that is Gerald and Netlify.
Yeah, so they've done a great job of that. Yeah.
Is a you know, they've raised $70 million. You know, so they're looking for a venture outcome, you know, a venture scale outcome. You know, they want to build the business into, you know, a $1 billion exit for their investors, or multi-billion-dollar exit for their investors. You know, I don't think being venture backed means that you shouldn't be friendly to the developer community. I think there's a lot of conscious choices that you make as a business about, you know, who you're going to go after and who you're going to attract and what your strategy is. And I know that there's definitely a lot of there's definitely a lot of concern about that in the Jamstack community. You know, the way that we think about that is that the way that we think about it, the way that Netlify thinks about it, the way that any company that, you know, that is going after large amounts of revenue is thinking about that, is that you know, you're gonna probably earn the bulk of your revenue through enterprise customers, but you're gonna earn the bulk of your goodwill through individual developers. And I think that that's like, when I look at something like, when I look at a company like Netlify, I see that strategy kind of playing out, where they really recognize that individual developers are really what makes them work. And I think to some degree you see that in companies like Automatic and the way that the WordPress community has come up. You know, individual developers and you know, remain really critical to the success of a product or any kind of project.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of, particularly over the last 10 years and much more over the last 5 years, a lot of this bottom up rather than top down procurement for services like this. This is because, I mean, we're essentially B2D, right? We target developers, which is a relatively new market. And I mean, all of our businesses here kind of do that. This market didn't exist a long time ago. And from what I hear when speaking to people, actually, a lot of investors, they don't particularly like funding B2C, and they prefer B2B because there's just more money there. You know?
Yeah, building a B2C business to me is very the sheer number of people that you have to make a B2C business work is massive. And so for, you know, if you are building I think a bootstrapped company is a great solution to selling directly to developers when the individual developer that's implementing something is your buyer or the decision maker in the process.
There's something that's nagging at me. I'm curious as to, so you mentioned something very interesting. You said, so, you know, your VC scale when your total addressable market is substantial, like there's billions to be made in that industry. So the potential that you could actualize with this business could be huge, right? And like, I get that. My question mark in my head is like, why? So it's the same thing for us at Snipcart. You know what I mean? Like there's billions to be made in e-commerce. Like the total addressable market is huge. Yeah. But we specifically chose to stay bootstrapped. And I'm kind of wondering where our minds drifted, you know, yours and ours. Like, when did you say, okay, I'm not just going to take, I don't want just a small piece of that pie like we did, right? We have 2,200 customers all over the world. We're a profitable business. Things are going good, but it's not the scale and the grandeur of, like, I don't know, some other big businesses. So when did you say, okay, I want a bigger part of that pie, even though you could have had a little and built a beautiful business?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it was partially a conscious decision. I mean, like, or it was driven by a conscious decision to say, like, hey, this opportunity can be very large. Like, do you want 2,000 customers or do you want 2 million customers? You know, and I had run an agency. I'll speak from my own experience, and you know, Andrew might have a slightly different point of view about it, but you know, I had run an agency for a long time, and I had tried that business. I tried a services business with, you know, we had hundreds of customers, and you know, we were building things for all sorts of different kinds of people. So I got exposed to a lot of different kinds of companies, and building, you know, VC-backed companies, venture scale companies were really interesting to me. I wanted to, you know, it takes a certain there's a certain kind of shift or suspending of disbelief in your mind, where you say, like, you can look at somebody who's building a platform with, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of you know, customers, and say, like, I want to do that too. And like, I think we have it in us to try to go after that thing. You know, and some of it was like looking at, you know, Matt and Chris at Netlify and saying, you know, hey, they're building a platform that's impressive, and look at how it's changing the way that developers are building. And, you know, like, we think that being a part of this new way of building is really fascinating, and we want to have an impact on a lot of people. We don't want to just our aspirations are to impact this market in a big way, and not in a way that just affects maybe tens of thousands of developers, but we want to impact millions of developers.
I think that, if I can chime in here, my shift in point of view is a little different, in that, like, I think it's much simpler. Is that when you have an opportunity, you have an idea, bootstrapping and being in the agency environment that we're in, like, there's a lot of moving parts in that equation. And I think the realization that even within the agency was that was the ability to focus, and the ability to actually work on the important problem, and sort of how much time do we have to devote to this. And if we go 50-50 and work on agency stuff and build the product, we're never gonna get to where we want to go fast enough to make a difference. And so that's sort of like that idea of raising money and being able to work on something purely, you know, is, you know, VC is an accelerant. And so I think for me, that's when I realized that we should go raise money. It's because, you know, development, you know, inside of the agency is sort of slow, and you really need to hit some sort of break or some sort of change where you're either like instantly successful enough where you can now devote more time within the agency and make a case for agency resources to be put behind the product, or you say, you know what, let's raise some money, and that's what's going to fuel our ability to develop our company. So that's sort of my point of view as like being in that nest of the agency and trying to work my way out of it.
I have a question for both sides, which is, how much of the practical considerations of you need money and you have a timeline play into your decisions about to whether or not you want funding or don't want funding? Like, I'm curious, Frank, because you're very bullish on not taking funding. What do you say to people who just don't have money? Then what is the path there? It's like, you know that it will take you, you know, your whatever trajectory, 1 year, 2 years, to reach a point where you'll be ramen profitable.
Yes.
What do you do then?
Well, I used to tell them to buy Bitcoin, but now, you know, it's a high price of entry, but still bullish, still long on Bitcoin, folks. But in all seriousness, I feel like there are hybrid starters for bootstrappers. And what I mean by that is, like, if you've listened to any of the Rob Walling stuff and Startups for the Rest of Us and Cortland at Indie Hackers, they talk about it a lot. And it's possible in 2020 to start a business without taking a lot of risks. And that often involves going hybrid for a while. And what I mean is, like, keeping your job and negotiating a four days a week of work only, so you can have 2 or 3 days left to work on something else, right? And then the more the something else starts making money and gains traction, the more you can quit the other thing. So there could be some kind of hybrids like this. Another thing that I strongly encourage people to do is, people who are working in agencies, web development agencies, they're exposed to so many problems. And I feel like agencies are these like cores where you can feel and see a problem and work on it and see an opportunity to build something around this. So if you want to reverse the risk, you can go like the entrepreneur way. And as an employee of the agency, you can try to convince management and the people that we should start looking into this. And then maybe you put in some of your time or a bit of your money to have some shares in that, and it becomes its own thing eventually. What I don't like, I'm not a, many entrepreneurs are very bold and they'll say, I can live with risks and I take risks and that kind of stuff. And I'm not that kind of guy, you know. I'm very anxious. I hate risks. So I'm not advocating for quit your job and sell your things and try as much as you can for a while and eat ramens in 2 years. Like, I feel like people have to find these hybrids. You can build an audience first, right? That's another one. You can do your work, start teaching a tool or a course, and make a little money, get some people to know you, and then you come up with an MVP and you're like, hey, folks, I've been teaching you Laravel for I don't know how many years. I'm working on Fathom analytics, and my friend Paul Jarvis, that's the Fathom guys, yep. Paul Jarvis and Jack Ellis, and then sell it to the audience that exists, right? So that's the kind of initial start points that I try to point people towards.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, I think you make a great point. And one of the things that I would say is that everybody, almost like 90, like even if you're going to be a VC backed company, like you're going to start by bootstrapping. Like that's just how you're going to start, because the vast minority of VC backed companies are going to get VC funding before they have a product to show or something to show off. And you're going to be bootstrapping it for a while. And if in that bootstrapping process, suddenly you become like a takeoff success and you don't need VC funding, then don't take it. If it, you know, like if it doesn't get you if it doesn't get you to the next step or where you want to go, then you don't need to take VC funding. Like that works out great. And for Frank, and Snipcart, it seems like that's exactly what happened. You know, you guys were able to bootstrap into a position where, you know, you had the choice whether or not, how you had the choice about what path you wanted to go down, if you wanted to grow it even bigger or you wanted to continue on a trajectory that you were headed.
Yeah, that's spot on. And like, to give credit where credit is due, we were lucky. Like, we were not like purely like geniuses about doing this a hybrid bootstrap kind of way from an agency, and this is the market we're going to target, and this is the trajectory. We didn't do that. You know, we kind of solved the problem that a customer in the agency had in a funky way. Charles did that. And then we were like, oh, some other people must have that same problem we had. Let's see. Oh, yes, they do. And then the way to solve that problem was more of working around technologies in e-commerce that were in place back then and going in the front end layer, right? Doing the shopping cart, the products right in the front end. And then the front end revolution happened. You know what I mean? Like, it became very, very cool. And like a lot of people and projects were putting money into the front end tooling and the static site generators. And then you had Netlify taking off. And it was like, okay, we'll call this Jamstack. And you know, this was not part of our initial plan. We just kind of went with that wave. And we're so like thankful for that. And now we have another wave that's much more dark, the COVID wave, right? We didn't plan on many percentages of the spending going in e-commerce instead of in real life, but it happened. So again, I want to say, like, I think we're good people, we're doing a good product, but there's luck involved, as with many ventures.
Can I ask if you all think, particularly Frank, do you feel like, because you came out with, was it V2 or V3 this last year? V3, right. And do you feel like you could have done that faster? I think it took you longer than you had hoped for. I mean, did you ever say, oh, you know, had we just had some funding, we could have done, you know, we could have thrown more bodies at this and got this out the door in record time. And I imagine the other side of that, Mark, is like, you guys, you know, you probably have a little bit more ability to dream whatever the perfect product might be and to push really for that.
Yeah, so what I would say about that is what Frank just described with their situation to me sounds like they had what you would say, what you would call product market fit, like out of the gate. So they had solved a problem for a client and then quickly realized and saw that could be applicable to lots of people. And it seemed like the thing that you built maybe applied really quickly and you found that product market fit very fast. I don't know exactly how fast, but from an outsider's perspective, like it seems like you guys like nailed a product and that product worked and people started picking up on it. And that's another aspect of like, you know, bootstrapping versus being VC backed. Like if it's going to take you a little while to get to product market fit, you might be a better candidate for being VC backed versus if you feel like, hey, I can like tinker with this thing and it's quickly becoming something that people really like, and I'm like struggling to keep up with the demand of what people want from me, then that's like it's creating like a virtuous cycle of product market fit. And what I would say is that like for our case, you know, we didn't have that product market fit right out of the gate. You know, when we first started Takeshape and we were coming up with the headless CMS concept that we launched, you know, there were a lot of, you know, that we have a lot of fans of that approach, but the market in the CMS market is highly segmented. And it's taken us a while, it took us a little bit and it took us a lot of listening to customers and developers to understand that, hey, there's this problem in the Jamstack space right now that we think we want to tackle, and that has become the API mesh product and problem that we see as being really large. And finding that product market fit is something that takes more time when you're building out that kind of platform. And so for us, it makes sense.
Yeah, most likely. But then again, if you go back to starting inside an agency, you have occasions where you get paid to test more product market fits in some ways.
Yeah, you definitely do.
Yeah. So there's that. And to answer Bud's question, so this year, this is a subject that's very important for me, funding this year, because I legitimately considered raising money, you know, because what happened is that we were like 2-3 cowboys talking to each other all the time, hanging out with each other all the time, and pushing the product. That changed when we became 5, 6, 7 people around that time. And around that time, we still had that cowboy vibe, but we promised that we would ship the V3, and we kind of realized that things were not progressing as we thought they would. That when you're 7 people working on something, you need some kind of a process and like maybe sprints and maybe goals and maybe a little bit of market research and some UX revisions and blah, blah, blah. And we had none of that. So we kept hitting a wall and finding new challenges, new levels of complexity with the V3. And we were like, we're never going to ship this thing. So I was on a concussion break. I was off of work and I was thinking about this, and it was making me mad because I knew that people at Snipcart were mad at themselves, but like there was no one to blame. There was no process or organization to blame, you know? It was very like loose. So I said, okay, we need a product owner and we need just a bit of process, and we need a plan to scale the team and make sure we're repping up new developers. And I kind of got back from my health break and I was like, here's what we're going to do now. And that's about the time where I stepped up as CEO, right? And when I stepped up as CEO, I started thinking about all of the other things we should be improving. And I started seeing like, okay, different addressable markets, okay, niching down, okay, investing in some open source, okay, blah. And then I started to see competitors, right? Because you know the search volume and the hype around front-end tools and the B2D market, like Gerald was saying, it's just becoming bigger and bigger. So we have actual competitors popping up at a velocity that is much more scarier than back in 2013 when we started. So at that time, I kind of started feeling some anguish of like, wait. So Snipcart is here in the market and people think we're here, like, and people think we should get there even faster. And some people think we're like 20, 40, 50 people. No, it's just like, we just hired our 9th employee and there's kind of a gap between our actual positioning and what people perceive as our positioning and how we get there. And I kind of started thinking about this, and I was like, okay, we need to raise money. If we raise money, we'll get there first before many of the other ones. We'll like solidify and strengthen our brand, and like it's. And then, so I started talking with some VCs, and I realized that there are some, and I'll be very honest here, and it's hard for me to say this because it's not good for my ego, but there are some very particular, I think, pressures and incentives and expectations when you take venture capital money. I think growth becomes not a good to have, it's a goal, right? You have to go at a certain rate, you have to go fast, you have to hire fast, build fast, and spend a lot of money fast, and get to that next round and make sure people get back their investment and all that kind of stuff. And I started talking about people who did this, and they were like, yeah, it's a lot of stress and everything. And I kind of said, you know what? I don't think I'm the kind of guy who wants to deal with this. And I very much appreciate and love the people I work with and the vibe that we have going on at Snipcart, and like the proximity that we have between the team and our users. It brings me joy. And this is very, very valuable to me. And my fear of like not moving too fast or being displaced by a competitor or whatever kind of made way for another fear of like losing that kernel of like happiness that I had built inside that company of ours. And I kind of said, you know what, I'm out of this for now. Let me like learn to be a CEO. I'm still learning, and we'll revisit like in a few years. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just to comment on that, I think that's like a really important realization to have, and like, and you know, an understanding of yourself that shows you how much you understand who you are and what you want to do and what you want to get out of a company. Yeah, and it's a great position. It's like an excellent position to be in when you can say like, I could take this funding because people are throwing money at me, but I don't have to. And so like, I'll keep my, you know, I'll keep doing what I'm doing because I'm loving it. And that's like an awesome position to be in. Like, like props to you guys, because you've built like an awesome company that is making money and growing, and you get to determine your own future, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Frank. Andrew, Matthew actually had a question. He's curious, what has changed for you since getting VC funding?
What's changed? What's changed is we get to grow the team. We get to spend money on the things which we didn't have money for before. That is the biggest change in terms of like a technical point of view, and that's really exciting, because I think that this goes back to being inside of an agency and, you know, experimenting. In that case, you have to make a case. You have to make a case for resources, and it's always, you know, with what's going to make money and what makes sense financially. And, you know, if you're trying to build a more experimental product and you need people to work on it full time and have that level of attention, then, you know, having funding is amazing. And so we've been very lucky to hire some talented developers, and it's great to have, you know, collaborators to work with full time. So that's by far the biggest change VC wise.
Are you doing the CTO role, Andrew?
Me? Yeah, I'm the CTO.
So you're hands-on with the whole hiring new people, building your tech team, that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Yep. Is it hard?
Yes. Yeah, it's hard. But that's kind of like,
we're growing the team again right now, so we're hiring 2 more engineers. So
yeah,
you know, people want to apply. We're looking for people that have deep experience in building GraphQL APIs.
So thanks for the plug, Mark. But like I think that it's kind of like, you know, the thing that I wanted to sign up for. Like I wanted the challenge, you know, I've worked as a contractor before, I've worked at agencies before, I've worked in big companies and small companies, in software companies and media companies. And I never had that feeling of being in full control. And in a way, it's kind of like there's now what's the excuse? I kind of wanted to be held to that standard for one time and try it out. And you know, it's really hard. And you know, especially now with COVID and you don't get to see people in person. Yeah, it's a challenging thing, but it's also really cool to be able to bring new people into the fold, build really cool products, and release things for customers to try out. So that's definitely worth it in my mind.
Do you feel like there's a lot more pressure on you, or do you feel that the pressure hasn't changed because you probably felt pressure to succeed before anyway?
I feel like we've been on an on-ramp to that. You know, you can't deny that going into an accelerator, it's definitely more eyes on you, more pressure to perform. And then when you have a team, there's people who are looking to you for answers. And so, you know, that leadership element definitely adds much more pressure. And I think like this is something that you know, we want to figure out how it turns out. Like, and so like this is the way that it's worked out for us. And I think that that pressure is inevitable in terms of the route that we've chosen. In terms of it being like a giant increase once the check hits the bank, I don't think that it's been that much more. I think the gas has been on since before then.
Has your marketing strategy changed because of the funding? Because I mean, some forms of marketing can get expensive.
I think Mark can speak better to that.
I would say no. The overall idea of what we're doing hasn't changed. Sorry, I'm fighting difficulties with this microphone.
Frank, have you found any limitations in terms of your reach due to not having funding to be able to, you know, dump into all that?
Yeah, a lot. And so let me put it this way. Conferences and places where developers gather and share and everything, they're wonderful and they're darn expensive to attend to, just to get to it, right? We're from Quebec. We're not like just popping in the cool place in New York or San Francisco that's the next block. And they're expensive to sponsor, right? And there are a lot of them, and I like a lot of them, and I'd like to be there to talk to developers all the time. So that kind of a evangelism or developer experience kind of, what's the word for that role?
Developer evangelist.
Yeah, okay, that's that thing. It's like me doing it here or on Slack with you folks or on some webinar here and there, and we'll choose like 2 conferences a year that we throw a couple $1,000 to sponsor just because we want to say to the community, hey folks, we're there, don't forget about us. And we try to make some noise and shit. But you know, I see some big companies like let's take a very big one like Cloudinary. Every time I'm in a conference, they're there, they have a booth, and then they have like developer evangelists that are there physically spreading the gospel. And I remember I even have one woman in Toronto. We sponsored Vue Toronto, and she was telling me, if you're in the B2D market, that's the thing you should be doing all the time, and you shouldn't even measure ROI. You should just do it. And I was like, listen, lady, I totally understand, but here is my bank account. So I cannot do this. I have to have some form of some tightness when I control returns on investment. So that's why a company like ours, you'll see content marketing, you'll see SEO, you'll see social media, and then like a bit of email marketing, right? These are things that they cost money, but not heaps of money, you know, and we can maintain a good, nurture a good acquisition channel. But yeah, definitely a lot of limits. And I try to put a good spin on it. So I tell my team all the time, being bootstrapped and independent and profitable, we have the luxury to say no to a lot of things. So it's like, what do we say no to, right? A lot of things.
I would say that you guys have one of the best content marketing games. I mean, you and I have talked a couple times about content marketing strategy, and you know, like I've asked for your advice a couple times because I think that you guys do an incredible job with that. And you know, like I think that it goes to show you that you don't need a massive budget to make you know, to get your voice heard and get out there. And I think that that's another amazing thing that you know, that being in the space that we're all in, which is in the, you know, the B2D space, you know, a lot of that can be hustle, which is great. I mean, like you can get pretty far on hustle. If you got product market fit and hustle, as Frank and the Snipcart team have shown, you can get really far. You know, Andrew and I, when we had no money, you know, we were showing up at the Jamstack conference with like a suitcase full of t-shirts that we had printed, you know, by like an artist down in Williamsburg, and handing them out to people, like this shirt right here that I'm wearing. You know, we just handed those out of a suitcase. And, you know, that was like, you know, the hustle that you got to put into it. So yeah, I mean, you know, that it takes creativity to figure out how to do things without a lot of money. And even when you do have money to, you know, even when you are VC backed, you're not just like, especially in those early stages, like we are, you're not just throwing, you know, throwing money everywhere and sponsoring conferences and spending you know, flashing cash. Like you're trying to be very efficient with what your spend is, so that you can get to your goal, and you can you know, get to your next round of funding and do the next thing.
I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about the Jamstack ecosystem as a whole. Particularly, you know, Frank, you've talked to a lot of people, you've observed. Mark, you've talked to a lot of funders, you know, and I'm actually very curious to know what the VC folks, because they do have the capital B billions, you know, is the end of every sentence for them. And is there, you know, is there a lot of optimism about the space and that sort of thing? And what are the things that are going to be happening over the next few years?
You want to go ahead, Mark?
Yeah, I can start. So, but I know you've talked to a lot of investors because they've, you know, you've had you know, I think they look to you as a thought leader in the space. So you probably, I'm sure you have an opinion on it as well. But from my standpoint and the investors that we have and that we talk to, you know, the excitement about the Jamstack and this like decoupled, decentralized model of building applications in the future, there's massive excitement about that. You know, and that's why you see massive investment in the space. I mean, that's why you see Netlify and Vercel raising such large sums of money. It's because, you know, people that have kind of broken the headwater in the space have proven out the fact that, you know, this is a model of building that is quickly kind of like taking the developer community by storm. And, you know, there was that conversation between the two Matts about, you know, that, you know, the Jamstack versus.
Your audio dropped out.
Oh. maybe it's the maths.
I think it was my fault. I was not muted.
You know that there's this false premise, I think, that in the space that well, the idea that like this is not the way of things, like the way that things are trending, to me it doesn't make much sense to me. We see this decoupled way of building applications as being the way that everything will be, almost everything is going to be made in the future. There's a clear progression of abstraction layers when you're dealing with technology, and as engineers and developers, we've been building on these abstractions over decades and decades of computing. So if you go all the way back to like mainframes and servers and virtual machines and containers and serverless functions, these things keep getting abstracted over and over and on top of each other. And to me, the Jamstack and this decoupled, decentralized way of building is the natural progression of where that's going. And you're not going to put the genie back in the bottle where everything is going to be somehow like back as a monolithic application that's just running on a single PHP server somewhere. That just isn't what it's going to be. We're already in, what I was saying previously is like this, there's the false premise, I think, of the conversation between the two Matts was that like, somehow WordPress is not already operating in this way of building. And I would argue that, that's already it's already happened. When you build a WordPress site or you build anything today, you're joining lots of different services together. There is probably, no WordPress site, modern WordPress site built that is using, WordPress for the content management, WordPress for the authoring environment, WordPress for comments, WordPress for every single WordPress for analytic. Like there's no one system that's doing all of that. And so you're already building and bundling across lots of different services. And there's no way that that's going to go, we're not going backwards from that. We're going to continue to build abstraction layers. We're going to continue to decentralize our applications. I think that was the question. I don't even remember. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Spot on. So what do we think is going to happen in Jamstack ecosystem? Roughly that, Bud? Yeah, okay. So what Mark said is all true. I think this, so I think there are two things going on in parallel. One of them is fragmentation of functionality that has become apparent in micro SaaS and products that are very, very narrow and that look like features more than products, right? So we've been seeing this for years now. And alongside that, the Jamstack came along, and then you had another kind of fragmentation, which was, well, your app or your website does not have to be built in one monolith place. It can be built with different things. So another kind of fragmentation going on. But as we often see in the industry, the pendulum switches and swings from one side and goes back to the other. So what I think is going to happen, and that's after talking with a lot of people, I think that the pendulum swing that comes back from fragmentation in the Jamstack will go back the other way through things like StackBit. So, and things like your mesh prop value, things that say, listen, I know that it's beautiful to have all of these things that can work together, but sometimes making them work together is a pain. So here's what we propose. Here's our value prop. And StackBit is like one-click bundling of the trees, right? So deploy and then manage content and then generate something on the front end, like with a static site generator or a framework. And with that return of the pendulum, I think we'll catch the wave of like the marketers and the editors and the no coders and all of these builders of the web, all of these people, citizens of the web, that are not necessarily developers, but you best believe they're sensitive to performance and security and like user experience and all of these things that we hold dear. So I think this is the way forward. I think there's a lot of low-level stuff that we've nailed, right? Netlify, I mean, it's Netlify and Vercel these days, right? I'm not a professional in hosting and all that backend stuff, but I'm having trouble seeing like if that's where the next revolution will happen, at least not in a long while. So a lot of low-level stuff has been done, especially for developers. And I feel like bringing all of that together, not only the tools, but the people, right? So less technical people. I think that's one area that's going to be interesting to follow. And a lot of VCs that want to make a lot of money and spend and back some kind of a Jamstack horse. They talk about this too. Like they're interested in e-commerce and no code and marketing tools around the Jamstack. That's another thing, right? So I think it's fair to mention this. And one last thing, we're still gonna see firsts. And I really like the concept of like going first. So there's still tooling that's developed that's very cool for the front-end web development. I'm thinking about Svelte as an example. It's very cool, right? The guy is charismatic and like he's pushing a very opinionated agenda and whatever. But that does not necessarily come Jamstack ready or Jamstack branded from the get-go. So you have things like Jungle.js that say, okay, we're going to take Svelte and we're going to put this framework on top of it, and you can do sites with Svelte that are very Jamstack. So these kind of going first occurrences, it's my hope that we'll see more of them. And it's a great way to start a bootstrap company too.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. That was I feel like really well laid out. I think Bud, you were talking kind of about how Jamstack companies and Jamstack is an opportunity for bootstrappers because there's like a synergy between the way that we think about building. We think about like the architectural model of the Jamstack and how that really mixes well with solving niche problems for a bootstrapped company where if you can find product market fit really quickly with a niche problem, you can match in really well with that market. And one of the things that you could see in the theme of the Jamstack conference and in the Next.js conference that just took place was that, and you kind of just said it, Frank, like we've got the basic, like the foundation is being laid, and the foundation has kind of been put in place to prove out the idea that like building in this way makes sense. And now we get to like accelerate the adoption of these technologies and this architecture into like larger and more complex use cases. And so that means that we can tackle bigger applications, we can tackle more complex things, we can embed the Jamstack way of building deeper and deeper into larger companies where it will continue, where that will be the engine that continues to pull more and more investment and more creativity and more stuff through just by the nature of pulling it along with use cases inside larger companies. And that's where we, like, I think we saw a bunch of that with the Jamstack Conf, where like the Salesforce, the PM from Salesforce was up there talking about how their enterprise customers are like, hey, we heard of this Jamstack thing, and like, how do we do Jamstack thing in enterprise, because Jamstack's the future. And it's kind of like when people were like, hey, what's like that HTML5 thing back in the day, and like, how do we do HTML5? And you're like, well, there's a bunch of technology that actually is going to enable you to do all of these things. And and all of that gets pulled up the tool chain into larger and larger settings with more complex use cases. And so like we see like what we're building with the API mesh as being one of those enabling technologies that allows larger companies to say like, okay, I want to pull more of my developers into this way of building, and how do I actually get to do that? And so like, I think what's going to be really exciting is seeing this next wave of technologies come in and how they enable these bigger applications to be built with the Jamstack approach. And I think there was one of the jammies was like best best web application built on the Jamstack, and it was a finance app, which was really cool. And so like that's, I think, a sign of where things are going, right? Like we've kind of figured out the basics of static site generators, and that worked really well. And now you see things like more advanced frameworks like Next.js popping up, where you're doing static site rendering, in the client and on the server, and you're doing, like just-in-time rendering and, incremental builds and stuff like that, that are all enabling technologies. And now there's kind of the API economy that gets layered in on top of all of this stuff that enables you to build bigger and bigger applications. And so I think that the future of this is really like bright and very ripe for innovation from venture-backed companies and bootstrapped companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's interesting and something I see with a lot of these bigger players is just that a lot of their experience is with these old monoliths. And so they have a hard time imagining what it looks like for them to move Jamstack, because with a monolith, the answer is simple. There's one answer, right? It's like, how do I do this? It's like, well, you're doing it all in .NET. You literally have everything right here. Like when you move over to Jamstack, is how do I do it? And then the answer changes to like, well, actually this we're going to do in your build step. This part we're going to do in a Lambda function. This part we're going to do some routing here on the edge with these, Netlify redirects, for example. We're going to handle your commerce here, with Snipcart, and then your content marketers will edit everything through Takeshape. And so like the answer just becomes more complicated. So I think that a problem that we are all solving slowly is finding good ways to educate people on the solutions, because there are so many, and because there are a lot of different options and ways of doing things. There isn't the single solution. There isn't the answer, which is just like, oh, you're just going to drop in WooCommerce. Like it's not like, it's a different conversation from when you're talking about using WordPress. And so I think that that's a problem that we in the Jamstack space are still solving. And we have agencies like Bud, what you're doing with the new dynamic, and the way you speak with your potential clients and your old ones, and how you provide solutions. And I'm sure this is something that you're used to, which is telling them how we're going to solve their problem. So I know this is something that we do all the time with our different enterprise customers. And in some cases, we end up having to build bespoke solutions for them because we need to integrate with a lot of their legacy stuff, which is another common problem, which is it's pretty easy if you can build everything from scratch or take new Jamstack solutions. But part of the problem here is you still have this auth system through your legacy platform we need to connect with. You still have your blog through this, and you want to migrate, but you can't do that yet. And so finding these bridging technologies or building them is a hurdle that a lot of these larger companies are currently going through.
And it's interesting you talk about it as a problem. And I did a talk a few years ago about all the ways you can build your stack out. And the beauty of it is that you have a choice, and you can choose the appropriate tool for whatever you need to do, and only the tools, not more tools than you need. And that's a great differentiator between the monolith and the Jamstack approach. But at the same time, as you point out, that is also a liability because it can be bewildering and that sort of thing. And I think StackFit has come up before, but people who can start to bring those, and Takeshape, in a slightly different way, but bringing all of these tools together, yeah, I mean, and if you had a way to to build out a stack and then just have that stack as what people see, I think that's part of where things need to go, right? So people can grasp that.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that sorry, go ahead, Jared.
No, sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
No, I was going to say, one of the things that you mentioned is like education. And, one of the things that we've done is talk to a lot of developers about, what they feel like is missing from the Jamstack right now. And I kept hearing that education thing over and over again. And one of the themes was that people, developers can be highly creative, but they also want to, there's sort of like the Stack Overflow, the Stack Overflow syndrome that can sometimes happen, where you're like, I know this problem's been solved. I just, I'm going to look up how this problem has been solved. And there's a lot of that in the developer community. And when there isn't like an answer of like, how do I do this particular thing with the Jamstack, it creates like a wall for people where they're like, well, I don't know how to do it. There's nobody else has done it, and I don't want to be the first one to necessarily do it that way. And I think that represents like a huge opportunity for anybody that's, educating in the Jamstack space or talking about Jamstack stuff, is like, how do you just tell people that like, just how to build things? Like, you could just like, this is how you build this thing and this thing and this thing, like over and over again. Like, because we're in this new space, there's so much opportunity to educate people. And, that leaves, lots of room for people like Colby Fayok, who wrote that book, I think it was the How to Jamstack book. The book that Phil and Matt put together, I think is a great example of like educating people. But there's so much of that education that the Jamstack is currently lacking, that it means that there's massive opportunity to inform people and give people a new way of building things.
Yeah.
Gerald,
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask something. Do you think there is market potential, like potential businesses that could be spun around moving old stuff to Jamstack stuff, or it's more of a like convenience or features inside another thing?
There definitely could be. I do know that we have sales and solutions engineers in-house who help with this, and our support team helps with this. And then sometimes I bring in other people. Like today, I work on our infrastructure team, but I ended up helping today with an enterprise customer. So it's something that we are doing, and but this is not something that we have to do, So that means there's definitely an opportunity there for others that want to do it. I know Bud at his agency, they do a lot of work helping people migrate over to Jamstack over there, but you could probably speak with a lot more hands-on experience of what that's like for you.
Nice.
Yeah, we're in a weird position because, we only do Jamstack, and we've only done Jamstack for a long time. So, when people come to us, they have to be prepared for that switch, but yeah, we do a lot of switchover. But a lot of the people, particularly recently, a lot of the people that we've worked with, we've been working with funded startups and that sort of thing, where, they're already motivated, like, because they know in that world that they know that they need to do Jamstack. It's a little bit different with clients who are used to, say, WordPress or whatever, or Drupal and that sort of thing. And they don't really care that much. They're not as motivated. So it's not even a differentiator for them. It's really hard to get people to care about performance and security and efficiency and that sort of thing. And even cost savings. A lot of times it's really to them about, can I have my editors, edit, and something happens on the front end, So it's a really hard story to tell. And we've been trying to try to tell it in a less developer-centric way. And that Jamstack story has been developer-centric for a long time. And, we wanted to kind of tell that story in a way that makes sense to people who just have jobs to do, so, but it's hard.
Yeah, I find that, everyone's making examples. You could always find examples, but, it seems to be very heavy on like the blog examples. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to Jamstack, and then you could find a billion different blog examples.
Right.
But that's not necessarily what companies are doing. And that's not necessarily the example they're looking for. They're over here saying like, hey, we have Okta SSO over here. We need people to continue to log in. We need to protect this section of our website. We also have a blog that we are interested in moving away from this system that costs us, you know, $500,000 a year to something modern, but we need it to interconnect with this existing login system and mesh all these things together. And we don't really, we're not really telling that story, I think, that well in the different examples and blog posts. A lot of them are very like relatively simplistic, like Bud said, which is they focus on the developer experience. A lot of that is just like, hey, look at this, and you know, look at Markdown, and this is super easy, and you're like, okay, great, but that's not the problem that I'm trying to solve for my company right now, you know. And then, you know, so I think there's definitely a hole there for some of that education and getting, you know, people, you know, most of the way there. And that's really a problem for these larger enterprises. You know, the smaller companies, or your average company doesn't really have those types of issues. But as you all know, a lot of the money is with those larger enterprises.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other one of the things that I kind of heard you say was, you know, they're trying to migrate away from systems that cost them a lot per year. Yeah. And you know, we've kind of talked about how like, oh, the Jamstack is more cost efficient and stuff like that. And that's true to some degree, especially when you're talking about like, oh, well, I can just host my files on S3 and I can run, you know, a static site generator and not run a just when my, you know, just when my content changes or something like that, and not have to constantly run a server. And when you start to go like up market and you're not tackling like the basic, like I'm building a blog or I'm building a basic, you know, I'm building a basic brochure website or something like that. You know, the money problem actually isn't necessarily an issue. It's less about saving money, and it's actually more about opening up strategic opportunity for larger businesses. So if you can spend the same amount of money, but actually redirect resources to building the thing that actually is a game changer for your user, that's where like the enterprise value starts to really come in. And that's when things for like larger, even, you know, medium to large businesses, that's like where the differentiator becomes, to say like, I can do a lot more with the resources that I have available to me, and I can take people off of, you know, maintaining something and move them on to building out different, like something that actually provides differentiated value to my users.
So, I mean, that's a really good point, and that does connect to the problem that we're you know, a lot of enterprises are having. But bringing it back to the actual topic, do you think that if you were bootstrapping, you would have been in the position to be able to go to these enterprises and solve their problems, or do you think that getting that funding has put you in a position where you feel more comfortable standing in a room with these multi-million-dollar companies and saying, yes, we could solve your problem now?
Well,
No,
I would
Frank
say
laughs.
that if you don't, if you're bootstrapping, either way, if you can't stand in the room and tell somebody that you can solve their problem, then, and like say it confidently, I think you need to do it in both situations, because you could totally solve their problem as a bootstrap company. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's not, I've definitely like, I've definitely been in a position where I was, what I perceived as so far out of my league. If you're talking to a big company and they're talking to you and they wanna potentially buy what you're selling, the reason that they want to do that from a startup, whether it's a startup company or that's VC backed or a startup company that's bootstrapped, is because they experience a pain that is so great that they're willing to take a risk on a company that has not existed for a long period of time. And for a lot of enterprise companies, or large, you know, not just, I say enterprise, but it could be like an SMB company. For a lot of companies that are spending money on their software and spending like, because it is critical to their operations, like when they feel enough pain to deal with any startup, whether it's Netlify or Takeshape or Snipcart, it's because an existing provider like you know, a large massive company like that already exists is not doing it for them. And it means that AWS isn't doing it for them in the case of probably Netlify, where like something has gone, you know, there's a mismatch between what they really need as an enterprise and what a traditional or a large, you know, established company is going to give them. And that's true of whatever size company you are and however you're backed.
But to echo what, like, the question was a good question, because I think there is a whole world of like social proof and who do you know? Why are you here? Why should I pay attention to you if I'm a big company, right? An enterprise company. And like, right, there are some bootstrapped examples of serving enterprise customers well, I think, like MailChimp, but like these are exceptions much more than rules. And like for me, I do not want to solve your problem as an enterprise customer. I'm like, I've decided I'm not gonna do it. And I hate reading contracts. I hate NDAs, red tape, and like meetings and being serious and all that stuff. I suck at it. So we have the luxury to say no to that. But if we wanted to do that, I feel like it would be much harder without VC. So yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah.
There was a podcast by the guys who run Fathom Analytics, and they're bootstrapped, and they had a podcast on their enterprise customers and that sort of thing. And really the fundamental difference between their enterprise customers and their non-enterprise customers was the amount of red tape that, you know, like they would have to send them, if something was on the web, they would have to send them a PDF file and just things like that, where, you know, meeting their expectations had a lot to do with fitting into a set of rules, not so much the product, you know.
Yeah, and we've definitely found that with a lot of the enterprise people that come to us is they look for things like SOC 2 compliance, which, you know, when you're small and you're bootstrapped and you got like 3 people in a room, and, you know, it takes forever. It took us, you know, probably over a year to get it. And it's just, you know, there's these things that are time consuming. And then the question when you're bootstrapped is always like, how are we going to spend this? Now we can afford to hire one more person. Is that going to be someone that'll do sales and procurement and work on this? Is that going to be another engineer to make the product better? You know, is that going to be someone doing support? Like, is that money going to go to marketing because we're otherwise good and we just need to get the you know, good things out there?
I mean, to a certain extent, though, you're facing the same problem with you always have a budget. Like, if you raise a seed round of money, it doesn't mean you're instantly have money to not consider what you're doing. Like, I don't think things like a SOC 2 compliance or dealing with other like enterprise clients and spending, being able to spend a lot for them, you would still, it's still that, you know, your money to spend. You have to like consider whether or not you're going to get a return, or whether or not that deal's likely to happen, or whether the SOC 2 compliance is really better than hiring another engineer. It's the same thing. It's just, where's the source of that money? And I think the question changes as you get further along. So maybe if you guys are talking about, you know, a bootstrap company versus a seed round company, and then as you go further down the rounds, like you start to, you know, it starts to diverge a bit more. I think what in our experience, we still have that very frugal, you know, self-preservation mindset, even though we have more money to spend. I think that like once you have that traction and you have a fire, and basically people are just like, all right, you got something going, now we're just gonna pour, you know, gasoline on that fire and just pump you with money. That's like a very different stage. And, you know, I don't have any experience with that, so I can't talk to that. But I think at this stage, it's very much of a similar approach, I would argue.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I know I joined Netlify. I was there for the A round, you know, so I was there when we were less than 20 people at a dinner table to now we're over 100 people, and it is, the considerations are very different. How you spend your money is definitely very, very different.
Yeah, like you at the A round, Gerald, you would have been at the point where they had like found product market fit.
Yeah.
And they were and I remember because I was like an early user of Netlify, so I remember like what it was like early days and how it, you know, and it felt really good, right? And you were like, oh shit, that's actually going to be very successful.
Yeah.
And it was like immediately once they had pivoted from, I think it started as like BitBalloon, if I remember.
Yes.
And then once it kind of turned that corner, that was like, oh, there's product market fit there, and that's when that Series A funding round, I think, if I'm remembering the timeline, so they had found that and then raised again. Yeah, one of the things that I would say is like a difference between VC backed and bootstrapped when you're talking about like who you can sell to, and the kind of deal that you can go after. One of the reasons why, you know, it might be easier for a VC back, like one of the advantages a VC back company might have over a bootstrap company when it comes to selling into the enterprise is the cycle time of the sale. And so like if you rely on cash flow, like you guys rely on cash flow to operate your business, like I'm assuming, like because that's where the money comes from. And so like if you rely on cash flow to operate your business, like Frank and Snipcart does, you will find it harder to invest in the time that it takes to make an enterprise sale. And so like when you're VC backed, you can say it's going to take 12 months to make an enterprise sale. And so I can go 12 months without needing to eat, basically. Like I could, and what I mean by that is like I can go 12 months without needing any other revenue from anything else potentially to make that enterprise sale and make it happen.
That's good. I have a question. So you said that you went to TechStars, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But before going to TechStars, you and Andrew were already decent product people, right? Like you knew your way around product. But you also said that at TechStars, you learned a lot about raising money and funding.
Mm-hmm.
So my question for aspiring entrepreneurs and developers who want to build something is like, what's the number one thing that you learned over there? Is that how to raise money, or were there product lessons, marketing lessons? Like, tell me a bit about that.
From the TechStars experience?
From the accelerator.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the accelerator, you're definitely going to learn something about product, and you're going to learn something about the mindset of like what it looks like to be venture backed. And I think the biggest thing that came out of it for us was building a network of people and honing our, like, just understanding more about how fundraising was going to work and how to actually execute successful fundraising. I think that's a really hard thing for people to actually grasp and grok. Fundraising is hard. It's not an easy. It's not like I think a lot of the marketing that you see is about venture-backed companies is driven by VCs. And so what a VC wants is they want deal flow, and they want to see as many potential opportunities as possible so that they can get to pick and choose the best opportunities that come across their table. And so they prime a lot of entrepreneurs to think about companies and startups the way that a VC wants them to think about a startup and a company. So a lot of people kind of get railroaded into this way of thinking when they're building a business. That's why things like the Zebra Collective movement and Indie VC, that's why those things are really important, because it gives people an alternative story about how you can actually build a business. And I would say the content that comes out of VCs about how to build a venture-backed company is not the best at actually teaching people how to execute a fundraising, like actually raise funding and execute fundraising. It just doesn't go deep enough. And so, we needed a program like TechStars to help us get through that piece. It helped us get really focused on the product, really focused on what mattered, really focused on the outcome that we wanted, and really trained us how to execute a fundraising and make that work. yeah, that I would say that is the like the biggest thing that we got out of the accelerator. That, and we met a lot of great people, and had a really I would say transformative experience. I think if anybody wants to do an accelerator, I would strongly recommend, if you are a personality type where you want to work in a highly collaborative and supportive environment with a core group of other founders who are all pushing towards the same goal, which is growing their business and raising funding, then I can't speak highly enough of a program like TechStars to make that happen and do that. There's a lot of accelerators out there, and they each have slightly different models, and I would invite you to explore the different ones. But we found the TechStars program to be very like a really good fit for us, our personalities as founders.
It was in New York?
It was actually in Philadelphia. So Andrew and I actually moved to Philadelphia like a month after Andrew got married. And
so it didn't work that bad because he's having a kid now.
Yeah, it worked out. Yeah, but we moved down to Philadelphia for 3 months and lived in Philadelphia in a house in Passaic Square, and lived like we lived in college again. We worked from 6 a.m. We got up at 6 a.m. every day and worked until midnight for 3 months straight. And and that was what we did. And yeah, if people are curious about fundraising, and somebody asked if there were parties.
Henri,
the parties were Thursday nights. We would leave at 7 and we would go drinking with the rest of our cohort. And that was the extent of the parties. Everything else was work. But if people are curious about about the route of going an accelerator or fundraising, I'm always happy to answer lots of questions one-on-one about that. One of the tenets of the TechStars program is give first, and I think we really learned that through that program. One of the things that I would say that the program also taught me, besides fundraising, is how important and impactful mentorship can be in your journey, in your company's journey. TechStars has a strong focus on mentorship and building a mentor group around you. And I would say that one of the things that you get out of that is recognizing that your investors can also be a resource like that, where you don't have to just look at the people that are in your company for support. You can actually look outside of that and get mentorship and help and guidance from external parties. And that might be investors, which have a vested interest in your outcome, and so want to do as much as they possibly can to help you, and open you up to their networks and the advice that they've seen, because they've seen companies go through over and over again. But mentorship, I think, is another thing that the program taught us, is just how valuable that can really be. I had been a mentor myself. I had been a mentor for students for a long time, because I had a internship program at my agency through the university that Andrew and I attended. And so I had been mentoring other people for a long time, but didn't consider myself to be somebody who really had a mentor. And the program really taught me about seeking out mentors and not being afraid to want to approach people to basically get their thoughts and advice on what we were building.
thank you for sharing that. We're actually past time. So Andrew and Frank, do you have any closing remarks, parting thoughts?
Yeah, buy Bitcoin. And then,
Is that in lieu of starting a business?
Yeah.
Do you mean like get a time machine and buy Bitcoin?
Yeah.
No, honestly, I'm very, very thankful to have seen y'all faces and hearing some of the comments in the chat. It's just, even small gatherings like this, they mean the world to me, being, locked down and COVID life and all that jazz. I'm just happy to have a community I can hang out with. So thanks for inviting me, Bud and Gerald.
This is great. I love this.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. This was great. And we'll put this up and we'll share out links and you guys can share it out. And appreciate everyone coming and staying. Henri, thank you for always being funny. And hope to chat with you all soon. Can't wait to see you all the next one.
Definitely.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you in the Slack.
Bye.